Well, welcome everyone to the first session of the final day. We have 3 presentations today under the rubric Images in Transit. Thanks for your patience while we hope manage to iron out some last minute technical problems in playing a video that Jorge Agbo has sent in from Nsukka in Nigeria as a fail-safe because of his rather shaky internet connection. So we feel confident that we're going to be able to play that to you in just a moment. But let me introduce Jorge first of all. Jorge Emeka Agbo was trained in visual art, museum and heritage, photography, history and theory. And he now teaches in the visual arts department of the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. He recently completed a postdoctoral fellowship on the AHRC funded Museum Affordances Re-Entanglements project at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at the University of Cambridge. This is going to form the subject of his presentation. The project involved reactivating the colonial archive comprising photographs, artifacts and audio recordings gathered in Nigeria and Sierra Leone by N.W. Thomas between 1909 and 1915. Jorge is currently working on a book on social media photography supported by the African Humanities Programme and a fellowship of the American Council of Learned Societies, and we're delighted to have him here in the first instance via his pre-recorded video. So I think over to Costis, who's going to play us that video.
Yes, I'm sharing screen. Just confirm that the video has begun when I hit play.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Should I switch off the mic?
Thanks to Professor Pini and his photo the most part of this discussion. My sense from the beginning is not to present a paper in the sense that everyone has excellently done with their ideas clearly thought out. I just want to share my experiences working in Nigeria as a researcher on the Reentanglements project led by Professor of Anthropology Paul Basu and funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council England. Reentanglements project re-engages with the huge collections of photographs, artifacts, audio recordings, botanical specimens, and field reports gathered in Nigeria and Sierra Leone between 1909 and 1915 by Northcote Thomas, the first British government anthropologist to conduct anthropological surveys in colonial West Africa. We seek not only to understand the historical context in which Thomas gathered these materials, which are currently held in cultural institutions in the UK, but to explore their significance today, what they mean for different people in different communities, what actions they afford, and how their latent possibilities might be creatively explored. We conducted collections-based research at the University of Cambridge Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. We worked with artists who engaged with the archive and conducted ethnographic fieldwork in Nigeria and Sierra Leone, where we deposited the photographs, audio recordings, and pictures of the artifacts to the communities where they were originally produced. We shared our experiences in all of these by posting related photographs, videos, and accompanying comments on social media. In Nigeria, working with families whose ancestors were photographed by the anthropologists presents us with some of the most fascinating forms of appropriation of colonial photographs. Some are edited digitally by the descendants of their subjects. By transforming the black and white photographs into color, they alter their temporality. The edited images are reproduced and displayed in different ways. Some are inserted into family photo collection and treated as ancestors that have come back to life. These new appropriations demonstrate how photographs taken in colonial times become meaningful and significant today. We are prompted to think about photography as a mode in which reincarnation occurs. These practices also constitutes a novel kind of family photography that allows for exploration or exploitation of colonial past to advance family histories and to make political claims. On the other side are those whose ancestors are not pictured in the Thomas archive. They bemoan that absence because it challenges their rootedness in the land. In many ways, the examples from Nigeria extend some of the issues raised by Tina Camp and Gillian Rose in their work around family photography. In this project, the idea of family is important to us both at methodological and conceptual levels. In the course of his anthropological surveys, N.W. Thomas photographed family and kin groups. Many of the images are physical type portraits of individuals, some of whose names were noted by Thomas. Others are group photographs, most often described with reference to few of their subjects who have some political, cultural, and social significance in the community. In our own fieldwork, we follow Thomas' itinerary by working in the community Thomas visited and by tracing the families whose forebears were photographed by the anthropologists. Our project came at a time that the debate around decolonization, repatriation, and restitution had become intensified with new modes of communication that bridge the gap between different stakeholders of colonial collections. While we conducted collections-based research in Cambridge in 2018, some of the Thomas photographs and pictures of artifacts shared on the project's social media platforms generated a lot of controversy. For instance, there were questions about the ethics of collecting and the use of the camera in colonial times. So, when we set out for the reentanglement research trip, we anticipated hostility, and of course, that happened in a few places with remarkable histories of looting of artifacts, for instance. But for the most part, we were well received by many communities and families who accepted the photographs of their ancestors as treasured objects, which were put to different kinds of use. Let us begin with local policies of self-presentation, where colonial photographs are used to reinforce family prestige and to achieve or maintain visibility within community. To give you a background to the social and cultural configuration of community among the Igbo of southeastern Nigeria, for instance, a number of different ways of inculcating sense of belonging to community, which were obtainable when Thomas worked in Nigeria, have survived. These include festivals, status or age-based associations, and community projects. Our research in Neni, southeastern Nigeria, which Thomas visited in 1911, began with our participation in a festival called Nkadioka in December 2018. The festival borders on telling and reenacting the history of facial marking known as Ichi. In a sense, Christine Kremer's assertion about history comes to mind. It is not merely about the past. It is a living part of people's sense of who they are and how they relate to other elements of civil society. Many of the faces of men Thomas photographed in the Igbo-speaking region have Ichi marks. Ichi was a marker of affluence and high socio-economic standing that made its bearer immune to abduction and slavery, in the sense that European slave traders avoided those with marks as they would easily be identified. The people of Neni, a community in southeastern Nigeria, are historically known for creating Ichi marks. They traveled far and wide to deliver their services. In our visit to Neni, we met Raphael Udeze, an also titled man whose title name is Eise Bulu. We showed him the photograph Thomas took in his community, and he was excited to see the portrait of a man whose name Thomas wrote as Ikejaku Eseburo. Raphael identified him as his father, although Thomas' spelling of the last name differs from how it is written today, Eisi Ebuluo. He saw the photograph as a rare discovery, and what followed demonstrated appropriation of colonial photographs in constructing a particular vision of family. Over the years, the Udeze family had built its reputation in the community through all sorts of philanthropic work done on the platform of a non-profit organization named Agbo Foundation. These include scholarships, payments of monthly stipend to the only surviving man with itchy marks in Neni, and a hospital project intended to provide free medical services when completed. Thomas' photograph of Agbo is inserted into these complex relations of family, community, culture, and economic power. At another level, it triggered what developed as one of the major collaborations we had with people in the communities where we conducted ethnographic work with the Thomas collection. Agbo Foundation collaborated with Reentanglement Project by funding a film made on Ichi's scarification history and practices. Now, this photograph was taken in February 2020 during the making of the Ichi film in Nene. The man pictured here is Dozie Udeze, the son of Raphael Udeze, and the CEO of Agbo Foundation, crested on the t-shirt he wears. Also printed on the dress is the Thomas photograph of Ikejaku Agbo, while the man's face was left in black and white, but the exposure enhanced. A red cap with feathers were put on his head. The editing speaks to how Nigerians who have connection to colonial photographic archives accept them as their history, but at the same time extend the visual contents of the historical documents. Raphael Udeze told us that, as demonstrated by the name Agbo, his father was a holder of Ozo title, which is the highest title in the community, but unfortunately, that achievement is not reflected in Thomas' photograph. So the photograph was edited by bringing out that which it obscures, and the image was considered so important that there was a desire to circulate it as widely as possible. The photograph was publicly displayed by means of the t-shirt. Not only members of the film production team wore the crested t-shirt, a good number of people in the community were given the dress. The wearers, in a sense, became sites of circulation of a colonial photograph that came to be treasured as an important family picture. In another instance, the digital editing of the photograph is meant to bring it forward to the contemporary time. Chidikobi Mubani, a London-based Nigerian artist, has colored a good number of Thomas photographs, including this one, Ezenri, the king of the Igbo, in 1911. Chidikobi relied mainly on imagination guided by knowledge of Igbo history and culture. He notes that the visual elements of the black and white photograph are somewhat ambiguous and place the image in the distant past. So, to color colonial photographs is to move their subjects to our time to live with us again. Such is the story surrounding this photograph, also taken in Neni. The name of the man in the picture, as noted by Thomas in 1911, is Obidibo Ezani of Neni. We learned that the current Igwe, that is the head of community, His Royal Highness Onwameze Damian Ezani, is Obidibo's grandson. When we went to his palace to share the photograph with him, we were surprised to see a color version of it on the wall. Excited, Igwe Ezani told us that he had heard about our visit to his community and had got the portrait of his grandfather from Raphael Udeze, whom we gave all the photographs Thomas took in Nini. He added, "The photo of my grandfather, a handsome man, is one of the greatest treasures I have acquired. That is why I enlarged, framed, and installed it in my palace." The portrait was colored so that it would look modern. The backdrop of the photograph is replaced with blue color that fades into a black layer. The cap and one of the necklaces are rendered red, the dress ripped of its depth through its reduction to a flat semicircular white shape, and the skin giving a brown look. For Igwe Ezani and many others we met in the field, color photography marks modernity's giant leap in the development of the medium. The photographs Thomas produced more than a century ago have to be rendered in color to fit into today's family photo collection. It is, however, important to note that in the process of editing, some visual elements may be lost, thus something crucial edited out from history. The itchy facial marks, which in combination with the cap and feathers distinguished Obidibo as an also-titled man, have been erased. So, digital infrastructure has the tendency to distort history while trying to expand the historical scope of colonial photographs. In any case, whether the photograph is edited or not, for many people, it stands in for the ancestors depicted in it. When Chief Lawrence Ogbuefi saw the portraits of his father, Nwanna, he said, "With this photograph, my father has resurrected." Like Igwe Ezani of Neni, he framed the photograph and displayed it in his sitting room. His son, Tochukwu Ogbuefi, had also used the famous photograph of his grandfather as a WhatsApp profile picture. The resurrection evoked here speaks to the Igbo belief in reincarnation, the idea that time is not linear but exists in cycle along the path of which life flows endlessly. Humans are born, they die, and they are born again. When ancestors come back to life, they carry with them marks that they acquired in their previous life. Thomas photographs bear such visual codes with which connections can be made with their reference, whether their descendants ever knew them or not. When another young man in Nibo got the photograph of his grandfather from us, he said that the prediction of his father, who died a few months earlier, had come true. His father had told him that one day he would see his grandfather, who incarnated himself in him. He was expecting the fulfillment of the prediction to occur in a dream, unaware that this was going to happen in the form of photograph. The visual trope x-rayed in the foregoing comes with some sense of pride, so that those whose ancestors are not pictured in the Thomas archive lament about that absence and consider themselves unlucky. When we set up a pop-up exhibition in Ibuzo Delta State, a certain man was disappointed that he did not see any of his ancestors among the photographs. Another man asked him, "Who was your father that his picture will be in this collection?" Only prestigious people had dealings with Europeans and were photographed by them. He felt embarrassed and somewhat infuriated. He later came to us, gave us his father's name, and pleaded with us to search through the Thomas archive to see if we could find his picture. He said that his grandfather was a wealthy, powerful man and must have been photographed by Thomas. Colonial photographs are indeed put to all sorts of use in the communities where they were originally produced. They are deployed as a means to tell family histories and to present the family in the way it desires to be perceived. The photographs are edited to bring them forward to our time, but that process incidentally takes something away from the image. Nevertheless, with the photographs, descendants of those photographed by Thomas believe that their ancestors have come back to life. Thank you.
Thank you, George, for a terrific presentation, pre-recorded presentation due to technical difficulties with the internet connection. but I'm hoping that when we have the collective discussion after the next two presentations, that George will be able to join in then. I can see he's on the call now, so it's great to have you here, George, and we'll hope to hear a lot more from you very shortly. So our next presentation is by our greatly esteemed colleague Naluwembe Binaisa, who has researched photography in Nigeria for photojournalists. Very valued member of the team. Her work focuses on rapidly urbanizing Africa and the diaspora, local and transnational flows, visual culture, digital technologies, and the politics of identity and refuge. Naluwembe is committed to research inquiry that centers development discourses and centers Africa's epistemologies. In addition to Nigeria, she has researched in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Uganda, and Europe, and has published in numerous journals. She's currently an invited research fellow at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study in Amsterdam. And her title is Missing Photographs, Missing Histories, Conflict, Wild, and the National Imaginary. Over to you, Nalu.
Thank you. Just share my screen. Thank you very much for having me here. Right, let me just launch in straight away. Belonging, voice, and identity in Nigeria are claimed in a range of levels in the contested national imaginary. Photography is implicated in the relations of power, aesthetics, and aspirations that remain visible within the political and built landscape of post-colonial Nigeria. The billboard in this slide was mounted during the 2018 election campaign season for the presidency and federal governorships. The arresting composite group portrait blown up to monumental dimensions shows Chief Obafemi Awolowo as the father, etched through the gravitas of black and white, flanked in color by three contemporary leading political figures, the sons, who all hail from Osun State. It is an excellent example of reappropriation, but filtered through localized visual literacies that still privilege local specificities and a history of accommodation and subversions. Portraits of politicians, rulers, and religious leaders are common in the built landscape and media, as are photographs of deceased loved ones, commemoration events, religious events, and celebrations. What is not so commonly found are photographs of the violence and conflict that Nigeria continues to suffer from 60 years post-independence. I want to explore this phenomena of what I term missing photographs to highlight the entanglement of indigenous vernacular framings of the visual from the colonial to the post-colonial neoliberal geopolitical moment. I want to suggest that this should provoke us to think more carefully about the relationship between power, aesthetics, and aspirations, and that the invocation of a citizenry of photography, when centered through indigenous cosmologies, can facilitate a discussion beyond the framework of the nation state to reveal enduring societal structures. I suggest that what Strassler terms the as-if potentiality of photography is also, in this environment, intentionally harnessed, where the embodiment and lived realities attest to the phrase, the photographs are always speaking. Oh, got a missed slide, sorry. My time in Nigeria has been spent living in Ila-Rangon, an ancient Yoruba town in Osun State with elder photographers, Uncle Special, who's on the left-hand side and was known as Sir Special in Stephen Sprague's seminal article, Yoruba Photography, How the Yoruba See Themselves, and Simple Photo on the right, who holds a print of himself taken by Sprague in the 1970s. Simple Photo is also one of the few photographers in Ila who kept his old black and white 120 negatives some of which I will share in this presentation. The earlier slide I flipped to by mistake is an example of a photograph taken by a professional photographer named Adedeji Hamad under his brand Elixir. He's based in Lagos, and this was where I also conducted fieldwork. And as you know, it's the mega city and it's the commercial, industrial, and creative powerhouse of the Nigerian economy. And it's also the most cosmopolitan and ethnically diverse part of the country. What I want to illustrate with this photograph is that this is despite in contemporary Nigeria, the proliferation of the smartphone, which means nearly everybody in cities has a camera in their pocket, there is still a huge demand for the services of professional photographers, especially at key life stage events and moments such as weddings, christenings, funerals, as well as graduations, promotions. And because in these contexts, the photographer is deemed the professional, the one who will enable people to come out well, who can wash their image in Photoshop so that they look their very best, which are all seen as requirements, aspirations, and a need for these services. And I want to say that this need and requirement of professional photographers to memorialize these life stage events is a requirement and an aspiration across the whole of Nigeria, even in the conflict-torn parts of the land. These good photographs are still needed. They have always been needed, and they have all continued to be valued as a prerequisite for any event of substance. So then I think about the photographs I deem missing, and I realize that this is, and I deploy it as a fluid contested term, to refer to the scarcity of atrocity images in the public sphere, because these photographs actually do also exist. But I'm thinking that despite a legacy of violence and conflict that predates independence, if we think about the post-independence Biafra War, which was also being termed the Nigerian Civil War, the ongoing Boko Haram insurgency, the kidnapping of school children, secessionist agitations in the East, and the so-called farmers and herdsmen conflicts, which are diffusing across the country, as well as increased generalized violence and insecurity. This is a situation that coexists and becomes part of the everyday, something that people negotiate as co-constituent with their environment. And what I want to suggest is that it's not that these stories are not covered, they are in lurid detail with varying viewpoints reflecting different political stances. Yet what I've been struck with is the absence of an accompanying photograph depicting this same violence. These photographs are not front and center of the head and part of the headline that appears at the front of a news story. What you tend to find is a separate photograph which relates to a different story, such as a dignitary opening a building or unrelated celebration. So I want to take a step back and propose that the puzzle of these missing atrocity and conflict photographs in the terrestrial mediascape and built environment has deep roots and roots. So delving into the Earth's substrate, the roots of the land, and the multiple mobilities, the roots of these image events. As I think with the image event through the lens of indigenous cosmologies, the inquiry at the forefront of my mind is, which is really the inquiry we've had in the Photodemos Collective, what work does photographs do at the intersection of political imaginaries? This is a technology introduced as part of the instruments of subjugation, appropriation, control, and colonization of Black people and their land by the white colonialists, slavers, administrators, missionaries, traders, and those who followed in their wake. Some of the earliest images in circulation from the land that was later to be named Nigeria were taken in 1897 by the indigenous photographer J.A. Green of Oba Ovanramwen, the King of Benin, on board the SS Ivy on his way into exile. Although the most unflattering were widely distributed in Britain and Europe as trophy photographs to celebrate the defeat of the Oba of Benin by the British, their now infamous destruction of the Great Benin City, and wholesale theft of treasures and artifacts, still the center of the reparations and return of stolen treasures debate, I follow in what the leading Nigerian scholar and photographer Tam Fiofori has argued is that J.A. Green exercised an African sensibility through his attention to indigenous aesthetics and negotiating to take additional photographs of the king with his robes covering the chains that held him and in the traditional full body pose with his dignity restored. This sensibility was attuned to indigenous aesthetics of being and belonging, paying attention to the need to transmit a countervailing narrative of resistance and ultimate future victory. I want to call attention to the temporal dimension at the forefront of my analysis, hence my juxtaposition of the photograph of this grandmother on the right-hand side, taken by Simple Photo in the late 1960s. I think this acts as a counterpoint to show the continued popularity of the full body pose more than 70 years later and its attendant aesthetics. In the 1960s, when Simple Photo took these 120 negatives that I've subsequently scanned, these photographs of grandmothers at the end of their life cycle, requested by families, as often the first and only photograph they had of their elderly relative, as well as photographs of loved ones like these two friends, was at a time of increasing migration across Nigeria, but also at the time of a civil war and the war in Biafra that was raging in the eastern part of the country. In this slide, I have juxtaposed the photograph on the left, also taken by Simple Photo, with a photograph taken around the same time by the British photographer Don Mccullen, who's recently had a huge retrospective of his work at the Tate Britain, the National Gallery. Don Mccullen has been associated with taking many of the iconic photographs that internationally came to be associated with the Biafra War. Just as prints of photographs of grandmothers and beloved family members traveled with families involved in urban migration as ties to home, portable shrines of connectivity, a material keepsake and reminder of the rights and responsibilities one to the other, so too other images captured by European and American photojournalists traveled from the war-torn areas of the Eastern region to the global mediascape. Yet there remains a high sensitivity around these photographs of Biafra, of the Biafra conflict within Nigeria in the present moment. And there is also a current generation, a youth generation, in terms of my own interlocutors, who were wholly oblivious of the existence of these photographs. Towards the end of my time in Nigeria, I mounted an exhibition drawing on my fieldwork data. Included in this exhibition was the first group of photographs I encountered depicting communal violence. This was a cache of photographs held at the Obasanjo Olusegun Presidential Library. This particular conflagration occurred in 2000 in Share, Kwara State, and the photographs accompanied a petition sent to the president for reparations for livelihoods and businesses lost. The photographs either had victims' names written on the back or they had the name printed on the front. Some of them even had both the name and number imposed on the front of the photograph. It was very noticeable during the exhibition how visitors, when they encountered these photographs, visibly recoiled. Many of them walked past them with eyes averted. And I realized that the gallery space was a forced encounter. And it really helped me and the subsequent conversations and focus groups we held to deepen my understanding beyond what I had previously received as simplistic explanations that people from different ethnic groups just did not care about the suffering of other people outside their ethnic group. These often unspoken yet enacted and embodied relations of care and healing that were revealed in these encounters by people who were not necessarily Igbo, but who were also, and not necessarily Yoruba, but who reacted to these photographs and did not cite ethnicity or the war or as their raison d'etre for their reaction, led me to think that there was a tangible work of hearts and minds involved in this encounter that actualize rights and responsibilities and obligations of care to one another beyond the legacy of a citizenship based on the colonial governance of divide and rule. So I want to end with this slide and think about the work of Peter Eke and his groundbreaking and very famous article to Publics, where he gives an explanatory inquiry into the logics of the nation state in Africa. And Eke proposes in his analysis that in Africa we have a bifurcated public sphere, composed on the one hand of an amoral civil public that corresponds to the structures, violence, and exploitation of the colonial and post-colonial state. On the other hand, a moral primordial public that reflects the enduring rights and responsibilities of people to one another. In key respects, the moral primordial public is closely allied to the civil contract of photography that, as notes, demands a relationality beyond the political orders of the nation state. I've chosen to end with these images from the hashtag #EndSARS uprising last summer to bring us bang up to the present moment, where the transnational resonances of Black Lives Matters, discussed in Karen Strassler's paper at the start of our virtual program, also exploded in Nigeria with the youth-led movements hashtag #EndSARS. This was a protest against police brutality that was taken up not only in Lagos as the commercial capital, but across the country. I think this gives us pause to ponder how maybe in this digital age of the hypermobile image event, there is a shrinking space for indigenous cosmologies and alternative inscriptions of ways of seeing and being in the world and what they offer. The iconicity of one global point of reference seems to be the fuel behind the viral reenactments of certain images, whether it be the invocation of the American Statue of Liberty in this photograph on the left of Aisha Yusuf, who has been a long-standing campaigner for another campaign that evolved a hashtag BBOG, Bring Back Our Girls, about the missing Chibok girls, or if it's the anonymous protester who, waving the giant Nigerian flag, symbolizes Nigeria's name as the giant of Africa, blending this with the iconic viral hashtag #EndSARS and its resonance with the hashtag BLM. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Nalu, for that very clear presentation. So our final presentation before the general discussion is just finding my notes by Jorge Moreno Andres, who we're very happy to have with us. He's the director of the research project Memory Maps at UNED in Madrid, where he's also a professor in the Department of Anthropology. His publications include Mourning Revealed, the social life of family photographs of the victims of Francoism, which won the national prize in Spain for the best monograph on art and the humanities in 2019, and which he just tells me is forthcoming in English translation from University of Chicago Press next year. He's curated the exhibition Photography and COVID by Clemente Bernard at the Reina Sofia Museum, and the traveling exhibition Materiality and Political Violence. For the last 5 years, he's directed the International Film Festival on Migration and Exile in Mexico. And as a photographer and filmmaker, he's produced photographic essays and documentary films such as What Remains, premiered at the Margaret Mead Festival in New York in 2015. And his title today is Mourning Revealed, the social life of family pictures in the Franco regime. So welcome, Jorge.
Thank you. You hear me well? Yes.
Yes, very well. Does the screen need adjusting, or
Can you see the presentation?
part of the image seems to be spliced on the right-hand side, but Vindia, maybe that's my screen.
No, I think if we can adjust it slightly, that would be good.
That looks great.
It's okay?
Yes.
Good afternoon. I would like to start this lecture by thanking Christian Pini for his invitation to participate in this conference, and Iliana also. And of course, a big thank you to all the organization team. This is the first time I have presented my work in English, so I would also like to apologize in advance for any possible mistakes. I'm a director of the research project Memory Maps. This project focuses on the disappeared during the Franco dictatorship in Spain. The project examines the relationship between memory and political violence, collaborates in project to exhume mass graves, like that, and works in outreach activities such as exhibition and film to present the results of our research. Further information can be found on the website mapasdememoria.com. Spain is the country with the second highest number of disappearances in the world. People killed and buried in anonymous mass graves. Today, there are many people who are still searching for their relative remains. I have conducted research for more than 10 years with the family of these victims. An investigation into the relationship between family photography and the political violence. To begin this research, I had to look for the relatives of Franco's victims in different towns and villages. I have entered their homes and analyzed the photos. In all these years, I have collected more than 2,000. What have I found in this house? Photos worn out from being touched so much, like this. Photos with parts removed. Stitched together, like this. Photographic composition where the living and the dead live together. Photos that are hidden behind a picture, carried in a pocket for a lifetime, displayed in the living room, kept in a box with other pictures, with letter and different objects like that. Images that are kissed, cried over, enlarged and framed in the living room or bedroom, like that. What do all these practices mean? Some of these practices are similar to the traditional use of family photography. However, these are different. The photos are of murdered person. It is the only image the family have or their loved one. In this sense, these practices are linked to the mourning process. The photograph of a missing person permanently displayed in the living room, in the bedroom, or in a wallet is the most obvious sign that someone wants to relate to that absence and refuses to forget. This photographic collection have been hidden for decades as a form of daily resistance against Franco's regime. For me, to ask about the uses of photography is to ask about memory. For the Spanish case, this question is fundamental because the photos of the murdered have passed through 3 or 4 generations. It is now that the remains of those killed in the 40s are being recovered. Normally, whoever has the photograph has the memory of the victim. My research is thus an ethnography of absences, which aims to understand the relationship that families establish over the years with missing members through their surviving images. What, what has been the relationship between those who were killed and the relative who remember them? Why do some families remember and others do not? Why do some people have photos and others do not? The meaning of the photos is not only in the image itself, but rather in the relationship with it, in the pragmatic of the object, in the commission, care, inheritance, amputation, or framing, in what people do with the portraits over time. I am therefore interested in what people do in constructing sign, that is, in manipulating and producing a pragmatic with these images. In order to examine the memory that photo objectifies, it is necessary to situate the analysis on the image always in three variables of space and time. The first one, the sense of time inscribed in the materiality of the object itself, which make us consider the uses it has received. For instance, creases and other traces of wear, whether they have been torn, enlarged, or framed, or the presence of handwritten notes. What these people do with these photos? The second, the time inscribed in the stories recalled when looking at the photos. Time is introduced into space through this narrative, stories only known to their owners, which illustrate the true relevance for these objects. The third, the time inscribed with the movement and circulation of these photos, the different location in his journey through, and the people who have inherited or passed them down. Where are the photos? In whose hand? Who kept the photos? Who looks at them? This composition was the result of a conscious search conducted by his family. After learning that Alfonso Capilla had been murdered, his brother sourced the only body that was left for his family to mourn, a photo which was kept in the mine where he had worked. The arrival of this small image to the family home was like the arrival of the body, immediately causing an increase in the grief and mourning. And his son Anselmo recalled, when the photo arrived, you can imagine all the neighbors, my uncles, their wives, my cousin, everyone crying and picking up the little ones so they would not be present. The small image was the clearest place where one could objectify the space that from that moment, the death one would occupy in the life of the descendants. That is why the sister of the absent person commissioned this portrait where Alfonso appeared as a kind or protective entity over the children. The image is composed in the style of photographic esbotos, picture like that offered to the virgin to thank. However, in this case, the image of the dead ones replaced that of the divinity. In the following photographs, they have used the same small photo to make a different composition, one where the parents are with their murdered son. The first one is a composition for the children. The second one is for the parents. How much did the enlargement cost you? I asked Petra. Her answer was, I was 19 years old when I ordered it. My father and I are in the photo. I spent the whole of August blacking chipkeys to get 10,000 pesetas, which is what the photo with the frame cost me. I ordered the picture and went hungry again. This testimony showed how there is a hunger that you can go through and other that you cannot. The first was the moment traditionally used by the family to take photos, due to the function that this practice has of recreating the group at the moment of the greatest integration of its members, said Bourdieu. But here we see how this practice is inverted. Since the family ordered a photo, as the most difficult moment of their history, in situation where one must choose between feeding the stomach or feeding the spirit, situation where the integration in this image is not the result of the celebration, but an effort to give a place to the dead ones, to the loved ones. While Franco's regime was killing people and removing this memory from public space, some women did something as simple, as radical as commission a photographic enlargement. Enlarging the image means enlarging the presence of the murderer in the house. Murderer in the house. In these cases, the photo replies the body and the house, the body and the house replies the cemetery, because nobody knows where the bodies are. The portraits are necessary to stop the missing, and to do so, family turn profane image into sacred ones, a treasured image accessible only to some members of the family. These are photos. Change to this. Who has the photos? Mainly women, like this woman in Mexico, or this photo. This photo shows the presentation of my research surrounding by the women who gave me the photos and stories. Who has the photos? Mainly women. But what women has it after 3 generations? In this scheme, we can see how the photo has passed through 3 generations. The triangles are men and the circles are women. The one in blue is the missing person and the ones in red are the holders of the photos. One of the evidence revealed in this transit is that they are always transmitted through the female line. It's interesting to note that the exclusion of males from this line is not only due to tradition, but also to avoid revenge. Women were the ones who were commonly in charge of arranging and decorating the house, which photo was exposed or which was hidden. What is important to think about here is who is the woman who transmits this memory. I think, for example, in this scheme, is other one, we see the house of the widow and the house of the mother of disappeared person. Sometimes the widow's grief will be less intense because the success of a woman with a husband killed in a contest of ideological persecution in her descendants, her children. In a hostile contest that will last for many years, and where having a missing person is a stigma, many women will not transmit their husband's story, something that is objectified in concealment of the photo as a way of survival. Something different happens in the mother's house. Her success as a mother was her son, but her son has disappeared. The mourning in that house is going to be very intense. So we can see in the image, in one family line, some photos are kept, while in the other line, they disappear. It will be precisely the great nieces of the dead one who will transmit the story to the grandchildren. They will be ones who nowadays ask for the great uncle's grave to be opened. It's not not their grandchildren. It's the the great nieces. This is something that allows us to understand today the distance of some relatives in relation to the murder of their ancestor. It's not that they are not interested. They just don't know anything. This is what a family member said when I saw the schemes I have made with her family, and she said, "That is a good thing to classify family and pain, in which house it hurts and why it hurts. Knowing what a photo is allow us to open a deep reflection on the transmission of memory." This is a photo of the last scheme. Another here. A few months ago, in exhumation in Almagro, Ciudad Real, in which I led the team of social anthropologists, and where the bodies of 30 people were exhumed, we found the same photo in two different family homes. A photo of the same disappeared person when he was a child. It's the photo. At the grandchildren's house of the missing man, the image had nothing written on the back. In fact, they didn't know that it was an image of him when he was a child. This absence contrasts with the reverse side of the photo in the home of the great nieces. In one house, it says nothing, and in the other, the reverse says it all. If we read the reverse of this photo, said, "This boy is Jose Maria Almanza Camacho, who was shot at the age of 41 by Filiberto Prado, nicknamed Timoteo, Domingo Almanza, and Casimiro González for political matters. It was the assassination on October 25 in 1839. His mother, Vicenta Camacho, at 7 years old, keeps this memory to avenge her son. The emptiness reveal a faint memory in one house, while the presence of writing on the reverse of the other house points to an intense memory of the missing person. The fact is that in one house, they hardly knew anything about the history of the absent person, and in the other, they knew everything. Something that is objectified in phrases like, I can't tell you anything because I didn't know him, and others, I can tell you whatever you want because I always live with him. Neither knew him, but their relationship is very different. When nowadays some of those missing bodies appear at the contemporary exhumation, the families will take down those precise photographs with which they have lived so long and will carry them next to the remains. Those who carry them are descendants of those they only knew through photos. They are the ones who collected that legacy. It is interesting to understand that the political aspect in these cases does not come so much from assuming an ideology in which the disappeared participated, but from fidelity to the lineage. In fact, many of those relatives who carry photographs will actively participate in political parties. However, they will not do so because they share the ideas of their ancestor, but above all because they have seen the grandmothers cry in front of these portraits. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Jorge. Incredibly powerful, fascinating presentation. Thank you. Right, we're going to get all the speakers up on screen. So just a reminder to the audience that you're very welcome to raise your hand to ask questions or to put comments or questions in the chat. Maybe I could kick things off, and George's connection looks good at the moment. Maybe I could start things by asking a general question which any or all of you may want to respond to. And I thought all three presentations made me think again of the opening presentation on Wednesday by Karen Strassler, where she was talking about the resonance of images, really looking at photography as one element in a larger multimedia image stream. So resonance conceptualized as a kind of repertoire of images that keep getting cited and recited, endlessly iterated in slightly different ways. So my feeling was that there seemed to be a lot of continuity between that model and the evidence you were all presenting in terms of the reworking of photographic images, the recontextualization of images. But my question is, what's your estimation of the medium specificity of photography within this? Is there any sense in which medium specificity still matters, or is photography simply one of a number of contending practices? So I'm thinking of the role of Photoshop, of overpainting, of archival restoration that in some sense defaces the original. So I wonder if any of you have thoughts on that.
You hear me? Well, yes.
Yes, yeah.
Why the photo is important for sometimes some people say me, what about people in your research who don't have a photo in this mourning process? And in Hobbes we found different objects that evoke the missing loved one, like letters, objects, photos, no? We have a virtual exhibition with this, no? With these materialities, no? If you don't have a photo, you use other object for the mourning process. However, there is a desire to have an image, because in the image, in this case, there is the face. If the disappearance of the body makes the figure or the disappeared person more and more blurred, the photo reminds us the exact size of the body he had, no? That without the image we end up forgetting, no? That is why families choose photos when they exist as a place to continue talking to the dead, because the sharpness of the portrait is perceived as the place where the conversation with the absent are precisely the clearest, sharpest, more transparent, like a direct path to what is not longer there. No, the search for photographing is persistence. No, no matter how much time passes. I have a film about that. Is the importance of being Abelino Garcia. You can see it's in YouTube. It's about this point. He needs a photo. It's 3 generations later, and he in his house never say anything about grandfather, and never show an image. And I found the image. He contacted me. I got him the photo and part of the story, because I connect him with a hound, a sister of his missing grandfather. When he found the photo, he took it into his grandmother. He put in her hand and asked her, "Grandma, do you know who this man is?" And grandma didn't say anything. She stared at the photo and kissed it. He was the person she loved the most, but to protect her descendants, he hid him forever. I don't know if I answered the question. But...
Well, I mean, maybe George can come in. I mean, to sort of rephrase the question in the context you were addressing, you know, my sense is that the current day recipients of the portraits, you know, would have been as happy with or maybe more happy with an oil portrait of the ancestor, and in certain respects one could see their appropriation of the original photographic reference as trying to turn it into a kind of painted image. I mean, what are your reflections on the understanding, the specific understanding of the photographic element in those portraits?
Okay, thanks so much, Prof. My sense is that there's something about photography that makes it different from painting. And that thing is that there's a kind of democratization of access to tools and skills, because portrait painting is somehow canonical. To get a portrait painting, you have to look for artists who do that. And even among trained artists, not everybody is interested in portrait painting. I know in the institution where I teach, I can think of about maybe 2 or 3 lecturers out of up to 40 lecturers who are interested in portrait painting. But when it comes to photography, there is a sense in which many people have access to tools that are almost automatic. Like there are so many apps now on the internet that one can download and be able to work.
George seems to have frozen, but let's hope he's coming back in a moment. It seems like it might continue for some time. Nalu, did you have any thoughts on this matter pending George's reappearance?
Yeah, no, I really. Yeah, there he is.
Oh, George is back. If George.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I think it's a question of what is accessible and what is also cost effective to do. And then also remember that there's a particular attitude to photography in this part of the world. This belief in the truth claim of photography still holds sway. We know that photographs are edited again and again. We know even those who are involved in the editing still believe in the truth claim of photography. So to do anything different from photography would mean something else. So that's what I can say for now.
Great. Nalu? And then we've got quite a few raised hands to.
Well, okay, just very quickly. In the exhibition, I had the 120 negatives developed that Simple Photo had, and the reaction was, the example being the photograph of the grandmother, was people recognized them as and started talking with the photographs as a way to reflect on the countryside as the crucible of tradition, as holding some sort of space for culture to persist despite life in the city. So I was quite fascinated by the fact that it left the specifics of the personal were set aside, that this is your direct grandmother or aunt. And I saw the same thing reflected in a huge exhibition that was held in Paris called City Princesses, where another Nigerian photographer artist again blew up one of these old photographs of a lady, an elderly lady, and projected it. And again, it in that space, its resonances were more than. So I think the materialities and the possibilities of that the photograph can still be extended through time and space to represent, I think, are still very pertinent despite this other disruption of the digital.
Thank you. We have a question from, now I've lost the name, Mojubolu Okomi.
Thank you very much. I actually put some of my observations on. I am wondering about, I mean, I'm a political scientist, so please forgive me. But you know, photos can be staged and they tell what either the composer wants, the story the composer wants to tell. And then if we don't take photos of stuff, are they relevant? So their silence is also in terms of what we choose to privilege in telling stories. And, you know, what brings this to mind for me is Nalu's presentation about Nigeria, the fact that significant trauma is not really remarked upon, and other kinds of stories are covered. And when people, well, don't let me go on and on. So I just wonder about the silences and the fact that there are so many possible readings and interpretations to photos. For example, the raised fist, you know, can be the Statue of Liberty, but I think also it could be the Black Power movement. So whose voice are we going to privilege in our thinking about what's happening? And whose ideas inform the priorities that we establish? Which again speaks to, you know, the idea of relations of power in terms of both what we compose in the photos and the interpretations that we give to them.
Well, maybe Nalu and George have a quick riposte to that.
Thank you for that comment. You know, the worry about the editing of images or photographs is rooted in the foundational understanding of photography as objective. But we know that not long after the founding of photography, scholars began to argue against that there's nothing like objectivity of photographs. Photographs can be used to make statements, just like writers use their writing to make statements. And I remember Pablo Jacob, a documentary photographer who, after taking photographs, would use Photoshop to edit them and put in all sorts of things into the photographs he has taken. And if you ask him, he will say that it is editing that brings out the real reality of the world. So for him, the photograph, the way it is taken, is not enough to express the reality that we have in the world. And this is also culture specific, because the culture in which the photograph is produced understands the message very well. In the Nigerian context, for example, when you see a photograph of maybe a politician or the president, half of it is the president's face, and then the head is that of broken coconuts. A Nigerian would understand this very well, because coconut has a particular meaning in Nigeria. It suggests kind of lack of wisdom, emptiness. So, and when such a photograph is seen in the Nigerian context, one wouldn't bother or worry that it is edited. So one would quickly understand that the message is that this politician is empty-headed. He has no wisdom. He does not perform his duties the way the public expects him to do. So I think that we shouldn't worry about the way photographs are worked and reworked with digital facilities. Thank you.
Did you want to add anything to that quickly, Nalu? Or
Yeah, I think what I want to add is that it's really interesting how even in a rural context in Osun State, the clients are versed in the possibilities of Photoshop and the digital. And I think this is because there's a precursor before the digital era of still reworking photographs, touching them up, painting, over painting, etc. And so I think that it's not that, I would agree with George that still the link between photography and the understanding of evidence is still very strong. But also I think what's being done, there's a different kind of truth claim when you bring together diverse family members who are not together because they're in different countries or different cities because of migration into one family portrait. That family portrait is not a lie. Even though they have been manipulated to be in the one family portrait, it is still seen as representing those very strong bonds of this is one family. So I think then what truth means is also something that I found really fascinating, because the clients are sophisticated enough to also, there is an understanding, like people on their, I always, at first I was surprised when I first encountered it, that people on their birthdays will put not an age-specific photograph, but a photograph they regard as their best photograph, or the one that they like at the moment. So it's not like, oh, you're 40 years old, so you put your photograph today of you at 40 years old. And to also answer Professor Come's question about iconicity, yes, I think that's a valid and I'll take that on board, that equally the fist raised has, again, a reference to the iconography that comes from the Black Panthers and Black Power movement. But again, it's about what I was trying to think through is that in terms of thinking about clicks and how images become viral, there photographers, as well as maybe those who are posing for the photographs, call on a more global repertoire of imagery.
Great, thank you. Costis, you had a question. Costis, we can't hear you.
I saw a few hands before mine. Would you like to go with them first?
Well, why don't you, we'll follow them up, and if you can make yours a
Okay, sure. Nalu, just to pick up on your point about that point you made about cosmology, sort of shrinking space for indigenous cosmologies, you called it. I want to ask you a little more, if you can tell us a little more about that difference between the studio photograph and the photojournalist's photograph from the Biafra War. It seems that there's a very important point here. And I want to know if I've understood you correctly. Is that discrepancy between the familial and the sort of iconic, the photojournalistic and the local, is that a difference between indigenous cosmology as expressed in the local studio, unlike the photojournalist iconic photo, which serves the kind of humanitarian sensibility? And how is the local cosmology affected by that humanitarian aesthetic with the Biafra War that was infusing public spaces, I imagine, in Nigeria and elsewhere? And I was also wondering whether the simple photos example you gave the studio, is that like Vindhya's point yesterday that life goes on despite the war and people have to, you know, photograph themselves in weddings and the like? Or is it a point more like mine about forgetting violence selectively in going to the studio and photographing something entirely different? And a very brief question to Jorge. If I've understood you correctly and thinking about the bibliography on the Mediterranean, the crucial component, it seems, here is the role of memory in vengeance, reciprocal killings. And I wanted to ask you a little, if you can say a little more about how reciprocal killings work in the Spanish context. I mean, the classic Cretan example that I would know from Crete would be women sort of preserve the memory in order for the men to take revenge. Women are supposed to be sort of key agents, key actors in negotiating clashes and unions between the agnatic clans. And I was wondering, with your example, and especially the last photograph where revenge is actually mentioned on paper, how that plays out in Spain, and whether Spain presents us with something entirely different about the gendering of photographs and of revenge.
can I ask you to produce quick responses to that, because we only have
Yeah.
5 minutes left and a few more
Okay.
questions to get through.
Well, Cassis, maybe we can pick up some of those other points together another time, but I wanted to really also ask George, because I worked in the western part of Nigeria, and I was very well aware of, but first of all, in the 60s, yes, there's a different type of infrastructure. It's very easy to seal off different regions of the country from each other. And so you could argue that at the time Simple Photo was making the photographs he was making in rural Osun State, even though there's an awareness of the war, it was not necessarily visible. But what I was struck by, that even with the anniversary of the 50 years since the Biafra War, that there's a scarcity of these photographs and an acute sensitivity to even me presenting them and discussing them with interlocutors. And I did wonder, and I would like to ask George, if the same holds true in terms of the circulation of these images in the East.
No, I think that was, oh yeah, you were coming back to Costis's question, Jorge, and then George, you could respond to Nalu. Does that make sense?
He's lost his connection now.
Okay.
Oh, he's back, he's back.
But Jorge, do you want to respond to Costis?
If I understand well, it's about the women or not men have used photos or the strategies, or this is a question about the women.
It's about women in vengeance killings,
Okay.
and the role and photography in the constellation.
Photographs are more in women's hands than in men. I think it has to do with women working at home and men outside. They are in charge not only of working in that space, but also of giving it meaning. And that meaning is given with the story and photographs. The photograph on display tell us about the family that live in the house. The family stories and the family photograph go together. The dangerous with, if you have children, sons, is that the children, the sons, fight with the murder, with the people that killed to his father, no? And then this event is only in many cases, in many houses, the men don't know many things, but the woman know all things, because the woman tell to the doctor, but also in secret ways, you know. And it's interesting that in a context of political violence, this is accentuated. The first thing is not to say anything to the sons. You don't say anything to them because there is a possibility to the son will avenge the father's death. Hiding photos because an exposed photo is always a question. So you only tell things to your doctor. How do you do it? How you do it? By giving instruction on how to conceal. There are proverbs in Spain that talk about that. In Spain is, quien quiera saber mentiras en él, whoever want to know lies in it, or in closed mouth, flies do not enter, en boca cerrada no entran moscas. They protect themselves by pretending. They have always done it. Nowadays, that was a difficult for me. When I come and I came to enter in house, they are people who have always protect themselves, and you have to try to break the barrier of silence, because silence was a way to survive. The thing interesting is sometimes not only other women know the things. Some women know something.
So Jorge, I detect you were picking up on some of the themes in a question from Oksana Sarkisova in the chat. So George, coming back to you, I apologize for having cut you off earlier, but did you want to respond briefly to Nalu's question?
Which one?
No, so this is for George Agbo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get the question, please. My network.
Sorry, George, I've been asked about the sensitivity and circulation of the images of conflict, specifically Biafra. And I was saying how in the 60s, the infrastructure would have made it easier to effectively cut off regions. But I was aware of the sensitivity even currently today. And I was wondering if in your experience working in the East, whether you have seen that these images circulate and are reproduced more.
Yeah, look, the circulation of images of the war, of violence, and some other things happening in Nigeria is really broad. The only thing is that people tend to see what they want to see, right? So if, for example, when people are making noise about Fulani herdsmen killing people in villages, so that debate is stronger in the regions of Nigeria where there is a kind of there's agitation against the activities of the Fulani. But somewhere in northern Nigeria, you don't see that kind of agitation. You don't see that kind of noise. You don't notice it because there's a saying that he who wears the shoes knows where it pinches him. So even during the war, the western part of the country and another part of the country didn't seem to even notice that something was going on. Life was normal in those regions. But then when you came into the eastern region, you would notice that something was happening. So I think it's about how people relate to events that are photographed. So right now, what is going on is the agitation coming back through the activities of IPOB and the arrest of Nnamdi Kanu. And then in the West, you have Sunday Bohu and his team agitating for the Yoruba state. So these debates are stronger in the West and in the East, but not in the North. But there's no such agitation in the North. So I think people see what they want to see.
Okay,
yeah, that's
probably,
what I say about it.
yeah, thank you, George. We just got a couple of minutes left, and I'm wondering whether Paul Vasu is still wanting to ask a question. Paul, are you still there? It'd be great to hear from you if you are.
Hi, thanks, Chris, and thanks for some great presentations. Yeah, I mean, I dropped my hand because things have moved on. I was kind of interested in, Chris, your initial kind of questions about the kind of materiality of the photograph, and just wanted to pick up very quickly on the question you posed to George about portraiture, like painting, a painted portrait versus the photograph, and also Jorge's reference to the photograph. So just to pick very quickly up on those points. What struck me, and I noticed that it was, Karen mentioned something, and sorry, I missed the earlier discussion about indexicality, and just going back to the indexicality of the photograph. And what I was reminded of in the question you posed to George about this painted image and the way in which the photograph seems to be, people are reworking it almost as a painted image. In our field work, on a number of occasions, we went to, George showed a photograph of the Ezenri, what he called the king of the Igbo, and in the kind of palace of the current Ezenri, they'd kind of got assembled images of all the previous Ezenris. And what was interesting, because we brought this image of Obalike, the Ezenri in 1911, was they represented him with a drawing, an imagined picture of what he might have looked like. But there was a lot of excitement about the return of this photograph because they could replace that imagined version, the kind of the oil painting, as it were, with the photograph. But then, you know, that kind of further movement where the photograph then gets turned into something more ideal, you know, as George was describing. So I think there's a really interesting interplay there between that issue of indexicality and then these, you know, what's created, as it were, from them. I was interested just to pick up on the other George, Spanish George, as it were, point about the privileging of the photograph and memory. And I just wanted to kind of connect that to the idea of the disappeared and the idea of a grave, because and I'm aware that, of course, on some gravestones there are photographs. So, you know, there's another twist to it. But it strikes me when you're saying the photograph is the privileged site of remembrance, actually for non-disappears, as it were, where there is a monument, a grave. The grave and the gravestone, let's say, is the privileged site of memory often. So it seemed to me there was an interesting kind of, you know, further kind of reflection one might make on that idea of the primacy of the image of the person, and how that might be replaced by the, you know, the gravestone, which presumably sits above the, you know, the remains of the person, let's say.
I think at that point, Paul and everyone, I'll have to draw things to a close. We've run over time. Obviously, we could go on talking for a lot longer.
There was one question by Maria Garcia. Should we trim a bit of the break, Chris, because it was on, I just realized, for a while.
Is that in chat? I was just going to draw attention to a lot of substantive observations and questions in the chat, but my inclination is to encourage people to digest them in the chat and for us to wrap things up now. So with apologies to everyone who wanted to contribute to the discussion, but was only able to do so through chat, I think we should bring the session to a close and thank Nalu, George and Jorge for three tremendous presentations, which obviously generated a lot of thoughts. So we look forward to seeing you, or many of you, or perhaps all of you, back at for the 4 o'clock session, which will open with Ariella Aisha Azule's presentation.